Bonjour. Hi, happy Friday, and welcome to week 8 of Explore Classroom Special Edition Photo Camp Live. I'm Andrew Brennan, an education fellow here at National Geographic, and your host every Friday at 2 p.m. as we learn from some of the best photographers in the world. And wow, it has been an amazing last 8 weeks. We've explored how photography is a powerful tool to understand the world around us, as well as our own personal journeys. We've learned how images can cultivate empathy and understanding and connection with others, and in doing so, help us to overcome adversity and injustice. Here's how it's worked. Each week, we've been joined by 2 National Geographic photographers who work in different corners of the planet to hear about their work, as well as the trade secrets they've learned along the way. You have had a chance to ask your questions directly with these photographers, and wow, have they been great questions. And the really fun part, for the past 8 weeks, you have been able to submit up to 3 photos taken during your assignments for one of our National Geographic photographers to review, to potentially have your work featured in next week's broadcast, and this one has been really special, possibly have your photos featured on National Geographic's Instagram account. And we have featured dozens of stories over the course of this summer. We've heard your stories and we want to continue hearing them. Join us on Instagram using the hashtag PhotoCampLive. At the end of today's broadcast, we'll share some of the stories that you submitted during last week's event. Last week, we were joined by photographers Ronan Donovan and Maurice Onyango. They focused on the complex relationships between wildlife and humans, from documenting the lives of wild wolves in Yellowstone and the impact humans have on this species, to filming documentaries about vipers to raise awareness and demystify the superstitions that surround snakes. Ronan and Maurice described a hopeful future defined by coexistence between animals and humans. Toward the end of today's broadcast, we'll take a look at some of the images you all submitted. But before that, this week, I'm excited to say we are joined by National Geographic photographers Lynn Johnson and Hannah Reyes Morales. Lynn and Hannah will discuss the power of photography to explore topics of resilience, empathy, and hope. They'll also focus on the value of listening to the people one is photographing, in order to not only see, but to understand the stories and people we have the privilege of documenting. As this is our final event in the series, participants will not be given a new assignment, but instead, toward the end of the broadcast, we'll hear from some young people about the stories they think are most important to be told during this poignant historical moment. So without further ado, let me pass it off to Lynn and Hannah to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their work.
Thank you so much, Andrew. My name is Lynn Johnson. I'm a photographer. I've worked with Geographic for, I don't know, maybe about 30 years. And it's been quite an adventure and a privilege. And definitely a privilege to be here with Hannah, who is herself quite an extraordinary photographer. So delighted to be sharing this adventure with you, Hannah.
Thanks so much, Lynn. I feel really, really grateful to be doing this session with you. I feel, you know, as a photographer, there's just always so much to learn, and I feel very lucky to be able to hear your session later, to hear your talk later. But I have to introduce myself. My name is Hannah Reyes Morales. I'm a Filipino photographer and explorer. I've worked with National Geographic for less than 30 years. I've done so far 3 assignments with them, but I've been an explorer with National Geographic since 2014. So I will start my presentation because I think it's probably best to get to know me through my work. Let me just do that. So I'll start. What does love and tenderness look like amidst adversity? I find myself consistently asking this question throughout the course of my life and as I make my photographs. Today, I'm sharing 3 stories that have given me the three different answers to that question. I grew up in the Philippines, which is an archipelago of more than 7,107 islands, depending on the tides. When I started out in photography, I was seeking to make photographs that showed the beauty of my country, a place that raised me, a place that I loved. I was searching for parts of home that made me feel like I understood something deeper about my country, as well as about myself. But I became a photojournalist in a time of turbulence. When Rodrigo Duterte won the Philippine election in 2016, I covered the bloody war on drugs that he waged over the course of a few assignments. So I witnessed a lot of violence. I saw what life was like for more and more people who were getting incarcerated in our jails, which has been ranked as the most crowded prison system in the world. And I also witnessed a lot of death. I believe that documenting the atrocity was important, but I also began to see how the stories that made it into the news didn't always portray the nuances that I saw on the ground. Around the crime scenes that I was documenting, I saw how families and how children would gather to see the bodies and then retreat back home, and they would continue life the next day. And so I began to document life amidst all this violence. I wanted to see how love and tenderness could exist amidst it. I also wanted to use the issue as a moment to show narratives that were not necessarily making it to the news. As a young woman, I'd already felt and seen love and wonder, but in seeing it amidst a backdrop of hardship, I was learning and seeing parts of humanity that I hadn't quite seen yet or understood before. I saw how rituals continued. This was in a Halloween, one of the communities that I was documenting. And while I was taking this photograph, I realized that the horrors were not necessarily in the costumes that the kids had on, but in the landscape around them. I saw people who were raising babies being lullabied amidst gunfire. And I also saw how the violence I witnessed were also compounded with other worries. Here I saw how a whole shanty community was set ablaze by a fire that day, and the families moved to an evacuation center, and I witnessed how kids continued to play and make believe, their toys still covered in soot. This image on the screen is of a child Puti who I met in one of the communities that suffered most from the drug war. My dream is to become queen, she proudly declares in Tagalog. She tells me this is her favorite dress. It is beautiful when my papa washes it, and her father collects coal for a living. So many lives in communities begin with boundless dreams, and through the course of growing up, they're met with sparse opportunities. But in the small kingdom where the Manila Bay meets the Pasig River, Puti reigns quietly, a queen in her own right. I found that even after I started doing assignments out of my own country, I never stopped searching for what resilience and making safer spaces meant for different people. And so the series of photographs that I just showed you really was the seed of the rest of the work that I would continue to do. The next story I'm going to share was my very first international assignment for National Geographic. It's a story on beauty. In runways, hair salons, basketball courts, and inside homes, I spoke with women about what beauty meant to them. Before embarking on the project, my editor, Jen, and I asked ourselves how we wanted to focus such a broad topic. We realized we wanted to focus on people who were redefining beauty. Through this story, I met Halima Aden, who's pictured here. I got tired of waiting and sitting around for somebody to represent me, she says. So why don't I be that person? Halima was born a Somali refugee in Kenya, and she broke barriers when she wore a hijab on the cover of British Vogue and inside Sports Illustrated. Beauty culture is one that has persisted for centuries. The concept of beauty has been constant through the ages. Paradoxically, the changes in how we define beauty is constant too. I looked at how beauty could harm as well as empower. Best of all, I got to see how beauty was used by women to create safe spaces to gather together. Brazil is among the most dangerous places in the world to be queer. It has the highest rate of hate-based homicide in the world for LGBTQ people. For communities in Sao Paulo, beauty is a touch point for coming together and in the process creating a safe space. Colectivo Cabezas proposes new ways of seeing beauty. One of their members said that beauty is searching for place. It's not about trying to conform to be something that you're not, but finding the place that makes sense for you. For them, the salon and the collective are a means of reimagining standards, finding belonging, and having space and safety for freedom. For them, beauty is about freedom. I also met folks who advocated for normalization of fat people. Fat is a word they're seeking to destigmatize. In this photo, these women were getting ready to go to a party designed to be a safe space to dance and celebrate without people's harsh judgments and without being put in harm's way. The party was hosted by a collective called Todo Grandona. One of them points a question to me. How do you get affection for yourself? They explained to me that for them, it's by channeling affection to each other, even as it is denied to them by society. It's being affectionate towards each other, their bodies, themselves. Fashion and beauty, the very things that have excluded them for ages, are now the same things that heal and bring them together. Our definitions of beauty and identity begin to form in our childhoods. I photographed ballet in Rio's favelas. This particular project was started by Tuani Nascimento, a ballerina from the favelas who started practicing by herself. Slowly, more and more girls wanted to learn ballet too. For Tuani, helping the girls embrace the beauty of their Black bodies through dance helps the entire community. I witnessed their dancing, each movement a lesson in grace in every sense of the word. The Slay Modeling Agency pushes forward transgender models, both men and women, towards mainstream fashion. Visibility has been one of the most important ways that the transgender community challenges existing worldviews. In the beauty industry, this visibility can be transformative. Kuei Tan, one of the models from the agency, she's not the one pictured here, says that for her, beauty is an armor. It keeps her safe from hate-based violence. And among the most striking people that I met in the course of this story were women who were becoming models later on in life. Lynn Johnson grew up during the civil rights movement and without ever seeing herself represented in media. She began to model at the age of 60 and has since gone on to model for brands like Fenty Beauty, Eileen Fisher, and Tommy Hilfiger. While taking her portrait, I asked Joanie what she thought beauty meant. She said, "I believe that each person needs to find what it is and what it means for them, and then work it." The images I made for this story hopefully show us women who are of our time and who are redefining beauty today. Here's what I learned from them. We are here, we deserve to be seen, and we are beautiful. I have one final story, and it's also about beautiful women. You can't talk about resilience without talking about healing. The story is about a group of women who survived sexual violence by Japanese soldiers during the Second World War. They were rounded up and interred in a red house where they were repeatedly assaulted for days. They call themselves the Free Grandmothers. In the 90s, about 90 of them gathered together and attempted to tell their story through the media in hopes of seeking support and justice. And this is how they were portrayed. Now, around 60 of them have passed away, not ever having seen any form of reparation. A few of them are losing their memory. But those who remember told me their stories. Our delicate bodies hardened, our minds shattered. We came home to ashes. I photographed what these women rebuilt out of those ashes. Most of the surviving women still live in the same town, neighboring each other and within 4 kilometers of the place of their trauma. Here, Emilia sits in a swing in her backyard. The house where they were interred is now dilapidated. Emilia and Isabelita return to it regularly. It's overgrown with greens, and the women are often stealing fruit from the site of their trauma. I found the grandmother's closeness to the natural world to be a stark contrast to the failing structures around them. In 2004, the Malayalas filed a petition asking the Philippine government to bring a claim against Japan. Our own government denied this petition and denied it repeatedly. There's no singular way to heal and to cope. For these women, they healed through their sisterhood and with each other. Without structures that supported them, they built a safe space with each other. This tree in their town is planted in land laced with memory, having been witness to atrocities, having been flattened out to ashes from explosions. Over time, and with careful tending to, trees and flowers now grow there. And from this, I learned that both the land and bodies have this incredible ability to heal. As I spent time with these women, I saw that strength exists in the most delicate and fragile things. This is a photograph of Marta, one of the free grandmothers, with her husband, Apollinar. She describes his support as essential to her healing. This photo reminds me really of everything I understand about healing. It reminds me that we do not heal on our own. Survival is an act of community. Survival is an act of love. I'm going to end here. I feel incredibly lucky to have seen the different ways people embody resilience. People I've met throughout the course of my work not only survive, they live with pride, with joy, with love, and with beauty. And that, more than anything, has been worth looking at. Thank you.
Oh my. Hannah, that's an extraordinary set of images and storytelling moments. I really, that story about the grandmothers. I mean, how many women, how many women do we know who, in their own way, have been through that experience of sexual violence? It is the human experience that, in fact, holds us all paralyzed in this world. But you treated them with such respect. Thank you for that.
Well, I think I was trying to think about, for me, I'm also a survivor, and I was thinking about how I wanted to be portrayed, when I think about what I went through. And when I went there, the fact of their lives was really so much of just their gardens and these beautiful spaces of lush greenery that they built. And I think, every time I was with them, that was really what they wanted to talk about. So it was really just taking a cue from them and taking a cue from, what their lives look like now, and making sure that I honored that and honored that that way of healing and that way of being, and in the process just learning so much about grace, about kindness, about sisterhood. I think often we're prescribed, not one way, but a very specific way, a very specific process of survival and resilience. And this story reminded me that we're constantly building that for ourselves. We're constantly figuring that out, and we're figuring it out with other people. So that was one of my main takeaways from that, really.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Reality intruded at the worst possible moment.
It's the current times.
Oh my God. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully continue
I'm excited.
in the spirit that you started with us here.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to pause myself now. I'm going to stop my video.
So when I see your work, and when I think about why photography in our lives, what draws us, what keeps us there day after day, year after year, person after person, I think part of it is just beauty. We need beauty. You know, we need beauty to help us be resilient. And it doesn't matter where we find it. It could be in your street, in your home, in your living room. It could be on the other side of the world. And I also have to ask, like, what gives us the right to be in the life of another? And I think this moment with this young man, Norbert, in Congo, who was he was suffering from monkeypox. He had eaten some meat, some bush meat that was picked up off the floor of the forest by his sister. So his sister was now tending him and helping him stay alive and trying to reduce his pain. And when we go into a place like this and see a person who is suffering, who is in fact the essence of resilience, I think it's our responsibility to understand whether we are doing this photograph together or we are taking advantage of this person. So I spoke with Norbert in English, in his native mother tongue, and in our body language to be very sure that he was okay with this moment and with me photographing his image to share his story with the rest of the world. It was for Geographic, a story about zoonotic disease. And he, above all, understood the importance of warning people not to eat bushmeat. So we, I guess, Hannah, you and I shared this passion for telling stories of people who may not be listened to by the rest of the world. Both of these folks are trans folks. They were born male. They believe and they see themselves as female. In the US, the little girl on the left, Oti, lives a very protected life. But unfortunately, the person on the right who lives in Jamaica, a society that is rife with judgment and religion, has been harmed so many times. She's been shot, hacked with a machete, burned, and beaten. And I think the places we go and the folks that we meet who allow us to tell their story are sometimes in their most difficult phase of life. Mostly what I am called to do in my professional life, but also sort of in my, I don't know, maybe spirit life, is to try to make visual the issues that are not normally visible. And this story was a story about languages that were disappearing. And, you know, the women, I mean, I think you are also drawn to photographing women. And this was a story about women and water for Geographic. And one of the most powerful women I've ever met was this woman who goes down into a singing well in northern Kenya. And she is maybe 3 or 4 stories down and passing water hand to hand to the surface where the water will be used for their families. Now, these women got there early in the morning, because if they didn't get there before the men would harvest the water and they would feed their animals. But when the women get there first, they harvest the water to feed their children and keep their children alive. I think as a photographer, you have to decide how to approach the story. What tools of photography you're going to use. Do you use portraits? Do you use a more journalistic documentary approach? You know, how do you bring the power to the page, to the screen? And in this case, a story about soldiers that had suffered traumatic brain injuries and had created these masks that were their the epitome of their suffering and the suffering they caused others. And so when I received this assignment, it was, I just saw a page of masks. It was a Xeroxed page of masks. And somebody asked me, do you want to do this story? Of course, I always say yes. And I got the masks and I carried them by hand to each person and asked them to put on the mask. I thought, they're never going to do it. But in fact, each person said yes. And for each person, this was a healing time. Sometimes we just have to sit and witness to extraordinary, breathtaking moments that we can't explain, and we don't know really where to put in our psyche, in our heart. This was a moment of a face transplant. This face was moving from the donor to a young lady who had tried to commit suicide and had destroyed her face with the gun blast. So it was one of those moments where the identity of this face was kind of disembodied and floating. Moments later, it was attached to its new recipient, and who is still alive and healing today. A midwife who saved her village. This is Q, a long-term project I've been working on about women and some men in the military who have experienced sexual violence. Q would just lay on this couch for days with nothing more than a bit of water or a bowl of ice cream. And, you know, when you're doing photography for a long period of time, you realize that you can meet the same people again and again. This young lady I photographed 20 some years ago in France. She was in the asylum where Van Gogh had painted. And then I met her 25 years later. She is a person living with autism. She is still an artist, and it was extraordinary to see her mature. More recent story on autism. I love being with these folks. They are unique. They are resilient because they are living in a place, in a culture, in a body that is something we typical people cannot reach. Just a few images from a recent project about COVID on Whidbey Island, supported by a Geographic Society grant. And I just wanted to show that touch is still possible. Touch, caring, compassion. We are wired to this life, to be able to give life, to heal, to help others. And so I spent time with folks who are taking care of the dying and the ill to probably as much convince myself that human touch is still possible. So resilience, I mean, you know, it's a cycle and we continue. And I think as photographers, we have to help each other not only lift up others, but help each other to live in the spirit of life and hope. So, thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn. That was so beautiful. I don't know where to start in terms of questions because I have too many. But I think what felt really, really resonant with me in this moment was what you said on touch. I've been thinking about that a lot, about, you know, how so much of how we communicate is actually about touch. And I realize how starved I've been for, you know, just small things like hugging my friends and being able to come, you know, come close to people, and even people I photograph, you know, like that real distance that you have to put nowadays, has been quite profound. And I feel like because of COVID, I've had to evolve my process quite a bit, because I've always felt that the way I've worked is to get really close, to get to know people for as long as I can, to get as close as they'll let me. And I think in COVID, protection has meant keeping distance. And that is, you know, the kindness that you give them, the protection you give them, is keeping distance. I'm wondering what your takeaway has been so far from working on that project, on COVID, on care and touch.
Well, I can say that I hugged each one of those ladies when we were done photographing and being together and sharing our thoughts, because, you know what, at some point, it's just not worth it. You have to take, I feel like I have to take the risk. And I think so many of my colleagues and people are sequestered, and I respect that. But I feel like, you know, now is the time we need to tell the story. And I think the young people that we're going to talk to, you know, and anyone who wants to photograph, you know, this is the deep challenge. How do we stay deeply connected, not just to our mission as visual storytellers, but to ourselves as human beings when we need to be together? We need community, we need touch. I mean, look at all your photographs. They all have to do with the way we literally or otherwise touch each other's lives. So I think we cannot be afraid. And that's the most important thing. And so I don't know if Andrew is like tense because we're not talking about the next thing, but
go on.
Because we're just like, actually, we talked before this. I mean, we had the best conversation. So I wish you could have seen that. But we do have photographs here from the photographers who were in the last, who participated in the last session. And I don't know if Jessica's going to share those on the screen, but voila. So how is nature part of us was the challenge. And Daniela actually, now for some reason I can't see the captions. So I will just share that I believe this was in Cuba. And she experienced this sense of nature that was very profound for her. I love the perspective in the photograph, that you know, that sky funneling into the road and that lush green on either side. So that's quite a beautiful image. And the next one is, I believe this is Cartagena, and you know, color. This is the language of photography. Color, design, light. So this certainly is successful on that level, and the way the color of the buildings resonate with the color of the coconuts, I believe, in the foreground there. So quite nice. And this from Jennifer Betancourt. Again, there you look out your window and there is this wildlife. And I think we don't stop enough to pay attention to what's outside. We're all turning inward now. So let's use photography to turn outward and see what the world still offers us. And in this case, a beautiful frame by Jennifer. And one more before we're over to you. Oh my God, what a great instant hummingbird captured mid-flight. This is so hard to do by Gianfranco. And I think one of the best parts of this is the way this bird is sort of framed by the greenery in the background. So quite successful images. Bravo.
Okay, and this is lovely. This is actually possibly my favorite time of day, when both the sun and the moon are in the sky. I love those transitional in between places, and it takes me elsewhere. I've been thinking a lot about how, because of COVID, Manila's back on lockdown right now, so I haven't actually been out of my house. So one of the things that I've been doing is, looking through other people's cameras, and this is one of those moments when I see this picture. I'm very grateful to have other people's eyes to sort of show me, what's out there. How is the world looking right now? How is the sky saying hello to us? So I love seeing this. This one was so I have the caption pulled up. Friends are muses, that's the caption, which I love. It's a very simple caption. And visually it's such a lovely photo, and also it's quite hard to get a photo like this without getting your equipment soaked. So I really love that you've managed to explore a different angle here. But I want to go back to the friends are muses idea. I think one of the things that I always encourage people to do when they ask me, how do I photograph? How do I start? I think, photographing those closest to us, photographing our friends, and photographing people who are comfortable with us is a good way to start, because it reminds you what to watch out for. How do people who are comfortable with you respond with you and your camera? So I just wanted to add that note. And finally, a bat and a moon. I love this photo, but I have to share. Last week, I was last week before the lockdown, I went on one last assignment, and there was a bat in my room. So when I looked at this, I was like, that brought me back to having that flying around my head as I was trying to go to bed. So this was a more calming moment. And I love that you sort of can't really quite make out, where the bat wing ends and where the sliver of the moon begins. So I think it's a really lovely, lovely image, and a very successful image.
Thank you both for
Thanks, Andrew.
just, such powerful presentations from both of you. And I think what you've reminded me, and what I hope you've reminded everyone watching, is that while the particulars and the technicals of the photo are important, the real passion and emotion is in the story behind the photo, and importantly, how you tell that story. And you two are both just such moving storytellers. So thank you for those presentations very much. We have some young people who have joined us on the line this week. So if everyone could go ahead and turn on your cameras. Over the past 8 sessions, we've talked about skills and techniques and approaches. We've talked about stories that are being told and untold. And so now I want to give a chance to the young people joining us who have participated in some of our previous sessions, to talk a little bit about the stories they think should be told right now in this moment, and some of what they're working on. So Alana, if we could start with you, if you could just remind us all where you're tuning in from, and share with us some of what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so my name is Alana and I am currently in the southeast of Ireland, the sunny southeast as it's known over here. And the work I'm working on at the moment is a project about both my grandparents. So they grew up on two different sides of the planet, and I suppose with COVID, we've all kind of gotten to see both the fragility of the human condition, but also the strengths that we have to go on. And my grandparents, they're 85 and 87, and I think Lynn said it earlier. We need to be telling these stories now while we have people, while we have the people to tell them. So it's really important to me to document the life that they have lived, listen to their struggles, their differences from us as young people, I suppose. And I think to remember that, and I'm a history student, like we need to remember our past so that we can improve on our future. And whether that past is different or similar to ours, we can learn a lot from the older generation. So this is a photo I took of my grandfather in his kitchen in his home in County Waterford. And it was basically, we were just having a conversation about life. His wife passed away about a year ago. And he's kind of, they were married for 60 years, and it's this conversation of, I don't know what my life is without these people in it anymore. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have because, I think in this photo he was tired, but he was talking about his life and giving me like wise grandfather advice on what I should do with mine and where I should go and how to interact with the world. And I think it's very comforting in this time when, as a young person, you don't always know exactly what you want to say or exactly what to do. And when someone can give you a bit of advice and tell you what direction to take, it makes all the difference.
Thank you for sharing, Alana. And before, as we move on to hear from Eli, I just want to invite everyone who's watching on YouTube Live to also respond to this question in the chat. What are you working on right now? And what stories as a young person do you think should be front of mind for people around the world? Eli, do you want to share a little bit? Let us know where you're calling in from and share what you're working on right now.
Sure. So I'm currently calling in from Athens, Ohio, where I've been living in my hometown now for the past 2 months. I was previously living in the Philippines for the past 3 years, but I moved back for personal reasons, not actually because of the pandemic. But this is the photograph I took. This is not the story that I'm working on currently, but this is a photograph I took just to kind of show the essence of what my next project is going to be. And I'm really looking into like relationship and empathy in a lot of my photographs. And this is a moment between a mother and a son, and the son just had a cleft lip surgery afterwards. And this was just like a touching moment that they had. And it was really nice to, in really tough situations like this, there's barriers that are in between people, and sometimes this is like their space that I'm trying to move into. And for me, it took a while just because there was some mistranslation that was going on, but like throughout the day I found that once you kind of open up to them, both like spiritually and intimately, like you break that space and you're just there. And that was kind of what I'm going to right now. And the story that I'm doing is, so I'm from an Appalachian region of Ohio. And now that I'm coming back to my hometown, I'm really interested in a lot of vulnerable communities, the vulnerable populations during this pandemic. And I'm looking into people that have had previous drug use, but mostly looking into several women that are my subjects that they're now trained professionals that deal with, that are helping people go through that process of drug treatment and resilience and like survival, and really work through those difficult processes. And right now, it's such a difficult time where everyone is so isolated and there's many economic pressures in this area, even without a pandemic. So right now I'm kind of looking into what does relationship between these communities look like now in a world of like social distancing. And I've been doing initial conversations with them first. So kind of starting out the project without a camera, um, just because it's such a vulnerable topic, I find, and I really need to build trust and empathy with these people before I, you know, bring my big DSLR or camera that comes, because that can be a barrier at first. So yeah, just kind of continuing those conversations of like humanizing this population that has frequently been heavily documented and hasn't had the ability to really put like a face um, towards a lot of issues that have been going on in this area for so long.
Eli, thank you for sharing that. And I'll just say, throughout these past 8 weeks, the most common question has been, how do you build a relationship of trust with your subjects? And you have really deployed some of the suggestions that have been put out there by the photographers throughout the time. So really bravo to you. And Kazim, I know you're here with us as well. I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your awesome project that you have ongoing right now, and also let us know where you're calling in from.
Okay, hello guys. I'm Kazim and I'm calling in from Nigeria. I currently live in the northern part of Nigeria, and uh, we've been on lockdown for a couple of months, and the lockdown just got called off recently. And we have an issue which is rampant in the northern part of Nigeria, which has to do with kids who are sent out of home at a very young age. So parents can send their children out of home from about 3 years of age. As young as 3 years, they are sent away from the houses to Arabic schools. And I've been living in the northern part of Nigeria for about 6 years now, seeing these kids on a daily basis and not quite humanizing them, not quite seeing them as humans per se. Just something you see every day becomes just normal to you. I never for once, stopped to ask them about how they're doing, what their day is like, or what's happening with them. But I was part of the photo camp in 2019, and this was part of what we went through. And the day we visited these kids, it was a very emotional day for everybody. And since then, this has become a continuous project of mine. So during the pandemic, a friend of mine decided she wanted to reach out to these kids because I stay in an environment where there are a lot of them, and I was eager to join in, and we decided to bring food to them, to give them lunch, because
Did we lose Kazim there?
take care of them. They would still hear them going from doors to doors, knocking, even during the lockdown, because that's the only way they could get something to eat. So a couple of us decided to get food, make food and drinks, and just visit one of the homes where they stay. And this was a picture which was taken from one of the homes which was visited. You can see most of these, the funny thing is most of the people here passing out food are actually not locals. So the locals do not actually care so much about these kids. So we are trying to raise awareness to constantly put these kids in front of the screen of people here in the northern part of Nigeria and other parts of Nigeria, so they can see these kids as humans, just the same way I got to see them as humans. So these are people who came from other states taking care of the kids. So I just felt this was a very important moment to document, because despite the way that we were advised to stay away from one another, some people were still willing to take the risk of just being selfless and showing that love. And I feel, especially in this moment when we are asked to stay away from one another, we need to show love to each other, because we just can't survive as humans without that connection. Uh, they say no man is an island, and we really cannot stay alone. We cannot stay secluded. We cannot stay isolated, despite the fact that we are in a very trying moment. We still need to show empathy for one another. So basically, my whole plan is to just preach love and humanity. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Kazim. And I know you all knew this was coming, but in the spirit of Photo Camp Live, I'd like to give Hannah and Lynn both a chance to react, respond, and provide any feedback that they have to your projects. Hannah, maybe we could start with you. Oh, Hannah, you're still on mute right now. There you go.
Okay, thank you guys for sharing your stories. I think that's really wonderful, and how different all of them really are from each other. I think, you know, like for Alana's story, it was really interesting to sort of think about how, and I was talking about this as well earlier with Lynn, is like speaking between generations. I think it's just so wonderful that you're doing that story, especially now in the time of COVID. I think the people who are the most, really, both the most at risk, but also the most overlooked, are people of an older generation. And I think just really shining a light on that. I'd love for you to look at Keitra Kahana's work called Artists for she and Isadora Kosofsky and a few other photographers from National Geographic are doing work on artists for long-term care. I can chat you later about that. Eli, we miss you in the Philippines. Wish you were here. But it was really cool to see what you had worked on here. And I'm really excited to see what you'll be doing there. Again, when it comes to trust and access, I was really excited when you brought up how, you know, I wanted to make that point earlier, that a lot of the time when you're starting these projects, you actually don't come in with a camera. I think that's such an important point and an important takeaway. Kazim, I think, you know, that the story that you're working on is so wonderful, and also quite a really a tough story to work on, but so important. One of the things that I'd maybe encourage you to consider, not necessarily from the picture you showed, but because I'd love to see the rest of the images as well. But I think that a lot of the time when we see pictures of people from vulnerable populations receiving charity, I think it's sometimes, I don't know, like I sometimes think about that, and could we go a next step and see, you know, what is their life like when they're not in those situations? You know, how are they living their day to day, and not necessarily just through the lens of, you know, receiving aid or charity. I'm just curious to see what your other frames are from that take. There's a lot more I could discuss, but I'll hand it over to Lynn since we're almost out of time.
Thanks, Hannah. Well, it just strikes me that you're kind of working in concentric circles. You know, like Alana, you're doing something very close to home, a person who you love, who is like inside your kind of heart circle. And I love the black and white, and I hope you continue to be with your grandfather at kind of very unexpected times as well. And Eli, I'm going to give you a hard time about a number of things, and I will come and find you in Ohio to emphasize this
Sounds
if
good.
I must. But photographers, obviously you have a different kind of training and you have had access to a photographic education. And I think you're using the language of that education. You're talking about subjects. We talk about access. Hannah and I were talking about this earlier before we got on screen. And I think we have to be careful. We start to dehumanize the very people we want to bring to life in the story. And I would just encourage you to really think about that. And because you're dealing with a group of individuals who, who the world sees as a cardboard cutout. And it's up to you to be in relationship with them in a different way. And it starts with your language. So, and we can always talk another time. Kazim, oh my God, Kazim, it just makes my heart so full that you are continuing on this project, because we met the first time when we were doing an actual photo camp in real life, 3D, actual humans, in proximity, when we were in Nigeria together. I don't even know when that was. I've completely lost track of time. And this was the most powerful experience, when the whole group went to the Quranic school and saw how diminished, tortured, lost these young folks were. So I give you many kudos for continuing the project. It is the toughest thing a photographer can do, is to not give up. And you did not, and you will not. And I commend you for that. So keep sending photographs, keep showing us, all of you keep showing us what you see. Thank you.
Please stick with it. And if you do post any of these on Instagram, you should use the hashtag PhotoCampLive. But in all seriousness, thank you to Hannah and Lynn and Kazim and Eli and Alana for joining us for this special edition, final edition of Explore Classroom Special Edition Photo Camp Live. As you all know, over the past 8 weeks, we have attempted to provide creative, passionate young people like yourselves and those watching with the skills to use photography to tell stories about your lives, about the movements being spurred around the world, the organizations who are impacting our planet, and the inventions that you and your peers are driving. We have explored the challenges and the triumphs of our own personal journeys. And we have considered concepts like, how can photography be used to cultivate empathy, understanding, and connection with others? What does it look like to overcome conflict, adversity, and injustice? We started this series with a quote from historian Studs Terkel, who once said, "The act of telling one's story is an act that enlarges democracy." And no matter what form of government your country has, I'll say that storytelling is one of the most powerful and fundamental things in human life. So thank you all for your dedication to this craft, to this work, and to our planet. Thank you for joining us today. And with that, we sign off on our final edition of Explore Classroom Photo Camp Live. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye,
Bye.
everyone.